Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome back to another video for EVE Online. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at all 4 of the Tech 2 Marauder class battleships and talking about how these work, how they compare to each other in C5 core Garrison ratting sites, including the Drifter Response battleship. I've recently run a little mini-series where I've taken all 4 of the Marauders out through that site, up against the Drifter battleship at the end, and a lot of you have been asking me which of these I think is best, which one I would recommend for someone who doesn't know which way they're gonna go. So that's exactly what we're gonna do today because, well, YouTube loves a good ranking video, you folks seem to really enjoy it, and, well, the one I did about the heavy assault cruisers was a lot of fun, so let's do that again, and let me know in the comments which kind of ships you want me to rank in another video for the future. Always open to new content ideas. If you do enjoy this video, please let me know. Drop a comment down below with your personal thoughts and opinions on the Marauders and on what more content you'd like to see from me in the future. Hit like while you're down there. Both of those things really help the channel, really help recommend it to the YouTube algorithm. It is a huge help. Please take a brief second to do that. And if you do want to go the extra mile to support this channel and keep me making content like this, you can do so by heading to my Patreon, my PayPal tip jar, and my Redbubble merchandise store, all of which are linked in the description down below. If you're fairly new to EVE Online and just looking at a video about Marauders because it's something aspirational in the future, I do also have a referral link down below. You can click that and get yourself 1 million free skill points. You don't even have to have a new account for that, you just have to have not used a referral link in the past. Anyway, with all that said and done then, let's start talking about the C5 core Garrison and how each of the 4 Marauders stack up in it. Before we get into the actual ranking though, let's go through the rules and the reasoning behind how I've organised it. And of course, this does come with the preface that this is my personal opinion. Some people may disagree, and again, would love to hear from you in the comments. Now, all 4 of these Marauders were tested without implants fitted. So obviously if you're running certain implants, you might get better effects out of each of these ships. Certainly if you find one that you really enjoy, running with a good implant set is always going to be recommended. It's going to help you do even better with what is already a solid foundational ship. I also have pretty much equivalent skills in armor, shield, gunnery, and missiles. When I was running these, I had all of the main skills up to 5, with all of the subsidiaries to at least 4. So for the most part, missiles, turrets, whether it's armor or shield, we're looking at fairly equivalent stats for each of them. Now the fits are also somewhat equivalent in cost. There's a minor sort of 200 million-esque between the most expensive and the cheapest. If you're flying a Marauder though, 200 million-esque is literally 1 combat site, less than 1 combat site in fact, so we're not going to worry too much about that kind of discrepancy in the fit costs. The fits as well won't be linked in the description of this video. If you want to get the fit that I've used for each of these Marauders, including the refit for the Drifter, those will be linked in the individual videos. So if you like the Kronos, go look at the Kronos video. If you want to see the Varga, go watch the Varga videos. The fits will be linked all there. I didn't want to have to go through all of that again here. Now, slightly different strategies are used depending on the ship required. Most of them are pretty much warp in and park, but where different strategies are required to make a Marauder work, I will highlight that in their relevant section. All of them, though, are completely viable. I want to stress that and make that absolutely clear right now. All 4 of the Marauders can do both the C5 core Garrison site and the Drifter Response battleship. So if you do have a definite preference, go in the knowledge that if you're going to enjoy flying one ship more than another, go for the one that you'll enjoy flying more. You'll get more out of it, you'll have much more fun in your game time. Yes, it's not going to be as optimal in my opinion, but playing for fun, in my opinion, is much better than playing to min-max, but again, that's entirely up to you. Finally, the ranking is based both on solo clearing the core Garrison and the Drifter Response battleship. I'm basing the ranking on being able to clear both of those with the refit and to do so solo. Now obviously if you have 2 of a Marauder and you're multi-boxing or you're coming with friends for example, that may shift things around, and we will detail that as we go through this listing as well. I'm including the ranking order for just the sites and just the Drifter at the end if you are going to be working as a team or multi-boxing, so do stay tuned for that. Anyway, that's all the preface out of the way. Let's jump right into ranking the C5 Marauders in core Garrisons. Despite having a reputation as the go-to Marauder for, well, pretty much everything, I have to say that the Amarr Empire's Paladin impressed me the least of the 4 Marauders. Am I just being a Minmatar fanboy and putting the god-bothering laser monkey ship low on the list just because? Well, no, actually, but to be fair, it is primarily because of the energy turrets. I may not personally be a fan of lasers, but they are the problem here, but we'll get to that in a moment. The Paladin, to clarify, isn't a bad ship. I'm personally not a fan of its design and silhouette, and I do think that the Paladin's Bastion graphics are the least inspiring and impressive of all four of the Marauders, but I do also understand that that's subjective. Many people do like these features of it and will disagree with me, and that is absolutely fine. In fact, the ship's bonuses to armor repairer amount and its bonuses to range do make it a fairly straightforward ship to fly. You just warp in, park it into Bastion mode, and blast away at everything in range, with the reps running the entire time. The real issue with the Paladin is its weaponry. Energy turrets are probably my least favourite weapon system in general, but whilst the Sleeper's Omni resists make the lack of damage type selection with energy turrets a moot point, their capacitor usage, even with the ship's bonuses halving that, are an issue. Core garrisons are brutal for their energy neutralization, so having your weaponry also drain heavy capacitor means you really have to fit for capacitor stability. The Drifter Response battleship is absolutely insane for the amount of neutralization it can put out. So, even with a dedicated capacitor fit, you will need implants in order to survive the Drifter. I'm going to say that again. To survive the Drifter with the Paladin, you will need capacitor-based implants. In addition to this, lasers don't have the best tracking. They're adequate for the sight and for the Drifter, but poor application does put the Paladin into 3rd and 4th place on clear times for the Core Garrison and the Drifter Response battleship respectively, meaning it does end up below average at both parts of these sites. Functional for sure, but not great. The Caldari State Golem was the first Marauder that I flew and tested, and thus it will always have something of a special place in my heart. I've been somewhat of a missile main up until pretty recently, and the Golem does have some very powerful strengths behind it. Firstly, as a Caldari ship, it has absolutely monstrous shield, and a solid enough capacitor to run a really quite powerful shield tank. When the Golem settles into a site, it takes one heck of a crowbar to dent that tank, let alone to actually shift it. However, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted that despite this unshakable survivability, the Golem is still in the lower half of this list. Much like the Paladin, this is due to the Golem's weaponry. In the Core Garrison or against the Drifter Response battleship, cruise missiles are overkill. Their range is absolutely unnecessary, and their DPS, frankly, is pathetic. Rapid heavies seem to waste the majority of the Golem's bonuses, and I honestly detest their reload time. When rapid heavies reload, it's time to get up, cook dinner, eat, wash up, and maybe hope that it's done by time you get back. So that leaves us with torpedoes, and simply put, against the Drifter Response battleship, these are utterly disgusting. The Golem has bonuses to missile application and to target painter effectiveness, so against larger targets, torpedoes slam for their full Bastion mode boosted damage. Against the Drifter, the Golem is an immovable tank that hits like a cosmic freight train, and it's able to maximize this even further against the Drifter thanks to damage type selection, being able to use thermal on the shields and EMP on the armor. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the Core Garrison site itself. Here, even with all of these bonuses, the Golem is like a blindfolded drunkard. It simply cannot reliably hit anything smaller than a battleship. The cruisers take a lot longer to kill than the Golem's fearsome DPS stat may lead you to believe, resulting in the slowest Core Garrison clear times by far. Yes, the Golem is the fastest at the Drifter Response battleship, and by a decent margin, but it's the slowest at the Core Garrison by an even larger margin. Adding the Sight and Drifter together, the Golem is barely faster than the Paladin. When I first started this series, the Gallente Federation Kronos was the Marauder that I was most apprehensive of flying. I adore the Megathron hull, and whilst I don't use hybrid turrets much, they're still significantly higher on my preference list than the bloody Flash Knights used by the Amar. That said, everyone told me that the Kronos was a very specific ship used primarily for nullsec DED running and a bit of a black sheep in regards to C5 ratting. To say that it surprised me should be fairly obvious, since it's second on this list, but surprise me it did. Why? Because it's clearly a ship designed around blasters and their range is utterly pathetic. Whilst you can normally avoid that by drifting around a site, Bastion mode precludes this. Turn off Bastion mode and the incoming DPS will break your tank and your DPS just falls to pathetic levels. You're sitting still for the entire duration of this site, right? So rats are only coming to you, better get used to it. This had me worried, but it turns out I needn't have been. Almost every target in the anomaly, including the Drifter Response battleship at the end, will eventually come well into range of even your Void ammunition. It does take a little bit of pre-site setup though, creating a warp-in point a little closer to the enemy spawns. This is really easy to do though, takes a few moments and allows the Kronos to run the sites at a frankly ludicrous speed due to the inherent nature of blasters, and the ship's bonuses to range, damage, and tracking. The Kronos does have a rather tense tanking style. Armor repairers are slow to activate, but thanks to Bastion mode and the ship's bonuses, each cycle gives a massive boost. This has an effect not dissimilar from a windscreen wiper, with your armor HP dropping down to a worryingly low level before suddenly boosting all the way back up to maximum. It's nail-biting at first, but that back and forth motion becomes almost relaxing after a while. Against the Drifter though, the Kronos also does remarkably well. The battleship orbits well within Void range, and the Kronos puts out an utterly terrifying amount of damage. It's not quite as fast as the Golem, but it is solid and simple. Load Void, turn on the reppers, and just let it run. Whilst it's only the Paladin that actually disappoints me with its Bastion mode graphics, the Varga could almost take the top spot on this list just because of how its Bastion looks. There's just something about the way that lightning begins arcing across the front assembly, about how the fins unfurl across the radar arrays, and the way that the side of the ship opens up with a literal furnace venting into space itself. Beyond this, yeah, I'm a Minmatar fanboy and a fan of projectile turrets, so the Varga does seem an obvious choice for me personally to put at the top of this list, but I promise you, this is subjective. I do have good reasons. The Varga is frankly put a beast of a ship. Its bonuses to tank may be slightly lower than the other Marauders, to counter the fact that it has bonuses to both armor and shields, but it has the notable advantage of being able to use autocannons. Autocannons have notably longer range than blasters, with only slightly lower damage output, and they can use barrage to hammer targets from utterly disgusting range. They have better tracking than lasers, despite fairly similar range options. Autocannons also have significantly better application against medium targets like cruisers than torpedoes would, while still being able to somewhat select their damage type when fighting the Drifter due to ammunition like phased plasma or EMP. What this means is that you have a slightly more skill-sensitive ship than some of the other Marauders, since it all but requires both solid shield skills and Marauder 5, a little bit more than you'd have to put into any of the other Marauders for example, but when fit and run properly, it rips through the core garrison noticeably faster than any of the other Marauders without needing fancy warp-in setups like the Kronos does, and it still does admirably well on the Drifter Response battleship too. It may be third place there to the Kronos, but less than a minute between the two of them. For the most part, the Varga warps in with hail loaded, tears through most of the site, only having to swap to barrage momentarily as some of the slower ships may still be approaching, whilst everything else in the site is so much wreckage. And then you can readily handle the Drifter too. There, it uses phased plasma for the shields, and then swapping to EMP for armor, and back to hail for the final burn through hull. If you have a choice of which Marauder you specifically want to aim for, then unfortunately, Minmatar is the way. Minmatar is Winmatar. And once again, load hail, never fail. I really need to get those on some t-shirts. And there you have it, all 4 of the Marauders ranked in order of how fast they clear a C5 core garrison and the Drifter Response battleship, with hopefully some pretty good inclination and reasons as to why I've put them in that particular order. Now I know some of you may disagree with me and think that there are things I could have done differently or ways to change the fit to better suit the site. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. I know for example someone did comment on the Paladin video that perhaps shooting some of the other targets whilst they're approaching with longer range ammunition ammunition may have allowed for a slightly faster clear time. I did go back and try that. It was just that little bit too fiddly and didn't actually increase the clear time by all that much. But again, I would love to know if I'm wrong, if I've got something mistaken here. I love to learn, I love to hear from people who fly these ships more than I do, so I can go back and give things another try. And heck, if you teach me something, when I do another video talking about that, I will give you a big shout out in the comment section, well, in the video, as a thank you from your comments. Now, I did mention at the start of this video as well that I would explain the ranking for just individually running the core garrison or the bonus sleeper. So for example, if you are just clearing the core garrisons, which of the marauders is going to be better just for that? And then if you are just going into a core garrison that has been cleared in order to spawn and kill the drifter response battleship, the order for those. So first of all, the core garrison. This runs simply with Varga right at the top with a notable advantage here. It is by far the fastest marauder for clearing the core garrison site. You just literally warp in, you shoot everything with hail, you don't have to worry about ammo swapping for anything. Obviously, you use your smart bombs up against frigates, know your clear orders and your triggers and things like that. But for the most part, the Varga is just park and shoot. It is that simple, and it clears far faster than any of the others. The Kronos is fairly close to the Varga in clear time. What makes it slightly longer is the fact that the Kronos, if left to its own devices, is going to have to essentially warp into a site, set a bookmark on one of the structures in the center, warp out, turn around, and warp back in close to that structure. If you're doing that with the Kronos, that adds a good 4 or 5 minutes to the clear time sometimes. Whereas if you have someone warping in something like a Covert Ops frigate and bookmarking it for you ahead of time, then yes, naturally you can do it a lot faster. The second bit that slows the Kronos down, though, is the fact that there are some battleships that spawn at about 70 kilometers range, and your DPS against those, even using null ammunition, is absolutely pathetic, and you do really have to wait for those to get closer. You could try and use something like a micro jump drive, or again, warp outs and warp ins, but thanks to Bastion mode, that's a lot more complex than perhaps it ought to be. Third place on the site clear times is the Paladin. It's not great at clearing the times, it is notably slower than the Kronos, but it's still faster than the Golem thanks to its application. It's a little bit trickier, you do have to ammo swap, but fortunately, what with crystals being instant swap, that's not too much of an issue. It's just about knowing which ammo you need to use for which particular target. It's not the greatest clear time, it's third place, but it can do the site quite comfortably. The Golem, on the other hand, then that comes in at number 4, and it is a big drop even below the Paladin. It is a very slow clear time for the standard core garrison. You do just park it, and you just turn on your torpedoes, which have like a 70-kilometer range with the fit that I was using, so they're in range of pretty much everything as it spawns, but the application from those torpedoes means that when you're shooting at any of the cruisers in that site, they take a lot longer to go down than the Kronos or the Varga will just tear through them. This means that the Golem, as great as it is at pulling those battleships down and the drifter response battleship, when it comes to the actual core garrison site, when you're going up against like 6 or 7 cruisers, it takes a long time to chew through those. In regards to just the drifter response battleship, however, this is almost inverted. The Golem comes in absolutely in first place by a notable margin here. The fact that it has damage type selection, monstrous DPS, and doesn't have to worry about the application issues means it rips through the drifter response battleship really quite comfortably. Also, the size of the capacitor on a Golem means that the neutralization from the drifter response is pretty easy to handle. In fact, if you are running an implant set that has some capacitor management implants in there as well, you kind of don't even really notice that it's neuting you. It is monstrous, fit for capacitor stability with an implant, and the Golem just laughs its way to the end. Again, damage type selection means that you can go for your Inferno rockets against the drifter's shields. You then swap in to not Nova, what they called Mjolnir, for EMP damage going up against the armor, and then just use whatever you have on hand to go through the hull. It's really simple, really straightforward. It does still take a lot of time. Those drifter response battleships have a lot of HP, but the Golem will do it fastest of all 4 of the Marauders. The Kronos comes in at second place on this one. Again, because the Drifter Response battleship is going to be orbiting around about 15 Ks, you are well within Void L ammunition range. You just punch with all of that DPS straight into the side of that battleship. You don't get the damage type selection, so you just kind of stick with Void and just punch through. You'll find the shields go down really quite fast, but the armor does take a little bit longer because its main weakness is EMP damage, and you don't have EMP readily available as you're using hybrid turrets. It does take a little bit longer, but again, with the Kronos' capacitor stability, the Drifter Response does not really do enough DPS to really worry your tank. You don't need implants or anything for it, just need the special fit, and you will get through there really quite quickly. The fact you don't have to swap ammo as well means it's almost AFK. Obviously, never go AFK in a C5 wormhole, but you get my point. You just kind of sit there, just shoot the Drifter Response battleship, and just until it's dead. It's really straightforward. Clear times are a little bit slower than the Golem, but not a huge amount. It's notable, but it's not enough that really makes you think, oh, maybe I should be using something else. The Varga is close third to the Kronos. It's not far behind it, thanks to being able to exploit those damage holes. Obviously, using phased plasma up against the shields and EMP against the armor does allow you to chunk through those quite quickly. You are a little bit closer on capacitor there. If you've watched my videos on the Varga, you'll know that I lost a Varga to a Drifter Response because I tried to move around, came out of Bastion mode, and thus lost the additional capacitor and all of that from the site there. And that did burn me through quite a little bit. I capped out on the Drifter and it did destroy me. But if you're sitting there and you get to full capacitor before starting the Drifter, you don't even need implants. Implants will of course help that situation, but you can do it without them. And the speed of the autocannons tearing through the Drifter does make it third best, but only just. The Kronos and the Varga, there is far less between those two than there is between the Kronos and the Golem. And between the Kronos and the Varga, it's a lot smaller than the distance between the Varga and the Paladin. The Paladin it's easily fourth place. Easily fourth place up against the Drifter Response battleship for a couple of reasons. One, again, as I mentioned earlier in the section, you absolutely need to have an implant ready for going up against the core and up against the Drifter Response battleship. The amount of neutralization it runs means even with a full capacitor refit, the Paladin will cap out quite quickly. If you are not heavily into capacitor recharge, you're going to need good capacitor skills, you're going to need a dedicated capacitor fit, and you're going to need an implant just to stop you capping out. It's that much of a problem. The lasers themselves as well don't apply particularly well up against the Drifter. This could ultimately get you to change your turrets completely, but that's not ideal. That's really not ideal up against the Drifter. It's that sensitivity to how easily it can be neutered, plus the fact that your application just isn't great. I found that using the Paladin compared to using the Kronos or the Varga, I was getting a lot more glances rather than penetrates and smashes and things like that, which does quite dramatically reduce the time. Fortunately though, obviously energy turrets are using thermal, which chews through the shields quite quickly, and it does go to EMP, which again helps with the armor, so you are exploiting the damage weaknesses, but that lack of application does make it significantly slower than even the Varga comes to the Drifter Response battleship. So again, for core Garrison, that's Varga, Kronos, Paladin, then Golem, and for the bonus Sleeper, you're going up against Golem, Kronos, Varga, and Paladin. Hopefully that gives you an idea of which one of these you want to fly. Anyway, folks, that is the end of this video. All four of the Marauders ranked about how well they do in a C5 core Garrison, including the Drifter Response battleship. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. If you've enjoyed this video, you owe me a subscription at this point. Subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, all things EVE Online and more besides. Anyway, thanks for watching right the way through to the end, folks. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!